technician, living in Columbia, South Carolina, a mother, a woman known for her routine. She lived in a quiet apartment complex and kept a predictable schedule, work, home, her daughter. But over several months, her life began to shift. Neighbors started noticing a man regularly parked outside her building. He didn't speak to anyone. He just sat and watched. Some saw him late at night, others in the early morning hours. He wasn't just a visitor. He was always around. Inside the apartment, there were signs of growing concern. Missed calls, a change in habits, conversations that ended abruptly when certain names came up. The woman had ended a previous relationship, but it seemed that relationship hadn't ended with her. Those close to her said she tried to maintain boundaries. Communication was limited to matters concerning their shared responsibilities, but her attempts to distance herself weren't working. What began as persistence slowly became presence, then pressure, then surveillance. On August 24th, 2023, something triggered an alert in her home, a burst water alarm. Emergency services were dispatched to investigate. What they found inside wasn't a plumbing issue. This case would soon raise questions about how many warnings were missed, how closely one person can monitor another without intervention, and what happens when leaving is not the end, but the beginning of something far more dangerous. The investigation uncovered more than a single crime. It exposed a timeline that was unfolding in plain sight, a pattern familiar to experts, but often invisible until it's too late. This is not a story of what happened in one night. It's a story of what was building quietly, step by step, in the shadows. If you enjoy real crime stories that uncover the truth, don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps us share real cases, spread awareness, and give a voice to those who can't speak for themselves. Before we begin, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what are your thoughts as the story unfolds? Welcome to True Crime Uncovered, where we examine the cases that shake communities and expose what happens behind closed doors. Real stories, real people, real impact. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Jaylan Hasty was a 29-year-old pharmacy technician residing in Columbia, South Carolina. She was a working mother with a daughter, known by neighbors and co-workers as responsible and private, employed full-time. Her schedule was structured around her job and her parental duties. She lived in a modest apartment complex, where she had resided without incident prior to the developments leading to her death. Jaylan maintained a consistent daily routine. She left for work at predictable times, returned promptly, and rarely engaged in extended social activity. She was not known to frequently host visitors and had a small, close-knit circle of family and friends. Her lifestyle was orderly, with no visible signs of instability or interpersonal conflict during the period prior to the emergence of the suspect in her story. Before her relationship with Conardo Bates, there is no publicly documented history of any volatile partnerships or reports indicating previous threats to her safety. No police reports, restraining orders, or complaints were filed by or against her that could have suggested a background of conflict. This raises a question. Was there anything in her environment that could have anticipated the situation that developed? Based on available records, the answer appears to be no. Conardo Bates, aged 31 at the time of the incident, was the former partner of Jaylan and the biological father of her child. His exact occupation at the time is not clearly documented in public records, though he was reported to be residing in the Columbia area and remained in proximity to Jaylan after their separation. No confirmed public criminal record existed for Bates prior to the events of August 2023, at least not one readily accessible through open-source databases. There is also no direct evidence of prior arrests or court involvement that would flag him to law enforcement as a potential risk. However, there were behavioral patterns that, in hindsight, align with established markers of coercive control and stalking. These include repeated presence outside the victim's home, refusal to disengage after separation, and uninvited monitoring of her activities. At the time of their breakup, Bates maintained connections to mutual acquaintances and still had access to limited aspects of Jaylan's life through their co-parenting arrangement. There is no indication he had relocated far or distanced himself in any physical sense from Jaylan's environment. This raises key questions. Was Bates already known to authorities before this case? If not, should his behaviors have warranted early warning or monitoring? And what, specifically, triggered the final rupture in their relationship? Jaylan and Canardo's relationship ended approximately 1 year before the fatal incident. The reason for separation has not been publicly confirmed in detail, but sources close to the family indicated that Jaylan ended the relationship after observing behaviors she described as increasingly possessive. Following the breakup, the two maintained contact solely for the purpose of co-parenting their child. In the early months following their separation, Jaylan made efforts to define clear boundaries. These efforts were non-legal in nature and included verbal and situational limits, such as structured child exchanges and limited in-person interaction. Despite this, there were reports from neighbors and observers of Canardo waiting in his vehicle outside her residence for prolonged periods. These observations became more frequent over time. No legal protective orders were filed by Jaylan, and no calls to police for stalking or harassment are publicly documented. However, her family members later reported that she had confided feelings of being watched or followed. These suspicions were never formally recorded, which left no paper trail that could have initiated police surveillance or preemptive legal action. Communication between the two reportedly remained civil at first, but began to deteriorate over time. The shift was marked by unsolicited visits, escalating frequency of contact, and indirect intimidation. Jaylan expressed concerns to those close to her about her ex-partner's refusal to respect her privacy and his growing agitation toward her independence. There is no evidence that Canardo made any threats in writing or left voicemails that could have been used as evidence. The surveillance he employed was physical: his presence in her parking lot, his waiting in his vehicle, and his apparent tracking of her daily routine. These behaviors, while deeply concerning, are difficult to prosecute under South Carolina law without direct proof of harassment or stated threat. In the weeks leading to August 24, 2023, neighbors reported seeing his vehicle on the premises more frequently. Still, no official complaints had been filed. Whether Jaylan hesitated to involve the police or simply hoped the behavior would subside is unknown. The presence of a shared child may have influenced her decision to avoid confrontation. The final escalation point came without public warning. On the day of the murder, authorities were dispatched to her apartment not due to a reported threat or emergency call, but because of a water alarm. Upon entry, they found Jaylan dead from gunshot wounds and Canardo injured from a self-inflicted shot. This raises unresolved questions. How long had the suspect been planning this act? Did he intend to kill only her, or was there a broader plan? Did the proximity of his presence in the days before the incident suggest premeditation? And, crucially, could intervention at any earlier point have prevented this? In the months following her separation from Canardo Bates, Jaylan Hasty began to exhibit changes in her personal and professional behavior. Colleagues at the pharmacy where she worked reported that she had become more withdrawn and private. Though she maintained punctuality and professionalism, her engagement with co-workers declined. She avoided personal discussions and stopped staying late unless necessary. Her family noticed a similar change. She no longer visited frequently and often ignored group messages or phone calls. When she did speak with relatives, she kept conversations brief and surface level. Close friends noted that she avoided discussing her previous relationship and changed the subject when Canardo's name came up. There were indications that Jaylan may have been considering legal protection. According to those familiar with the situation, she had looked into protection from abuse orders, PFAs, and temporary restraining orders, TROs, but had not yet filed any documented complaints. Whether this hesitation stemmed from fear, uncertainty about legal procedures, or desire to handle the matter privately remains unconfirmed. Jaylan also changed her routine. Neighbors reported that she began using different routes to and from work and altered her typical schedule. Some noticed she parked in various spots, rarely in the same space twice. She installed a water detection alarm in her home, an unusual step unless plumbing issues have been a prior concern, though no maintenance records indicate any. There is no confirmed written communication, emails, messages, or voice notes, explicitly stating she felt in danger. However, the behavioral shift suggests increased caution. The question remains, did she confide in anyone who failed to act? And if so, what was said? How did Jaylan respond to signs of escalating danger? Was her fear ever documented in a form that could have prompted intervention? On August 23rd, 2023, the day before the incident, Jaylan followed a standard routine. She went to work, completed her shift, and returned home sometime in the early evening. Records from the pharmacy confirmed that she clocked out around her usual time. Phone metadata confirms that she had a brief conversation with a family member after work. No red flags were raised in this conversation. Later that night, neighbors reported seeing a man in a black sedan parked near Jaylan's apartment building. While some recognized the vehicle from past sightings, they could not confirm whether it was occupied. One neighbor mentioned seeing movement inside the car, but did not find it unusual enough to report. There is no confirmed surveillance footage publicly released from that day. It's unknown if the apartment complex had active camera coverage or if any footage was handed over to law enforcement. Phone records show no incoming or outgoing calls from Jaylan after 9:12 p.m. text activity ceased around the same time. Investigators later determined that her mobile device remained stationary in her apartment from that time until following day. Kenardo Bates' presence in the area that night was later confirmed by triangulating his mobile signal and reviewing vehicle movement captured by nearby traffic cameras. He had been in the vicinity of the complex for over 3 hours before the incident occurred. Was there a confrontation prior to the murder that went unnoticed? Did anyone see Kenardo Bates enter the premises, or did he gain access another way? Emergency services were dispatched to Jaylan Hasty's apartment on the morning of August 24th, 2023, after a water detection alarm sent an alert to management. The alarm, likely triggered by excessive fluid or tampering, prompted a welfare check. Maintenance personnel opened the unit and immediately contacted authorities upon finding signs of forced entry and a non-responsive occupant. Law enforcement arrived and found 2 individuals at the scene. Jaylan Hasty was declared deceased on site. Her body showed multiple gunshot wounds to the torso and chest. There were no signs of physical struggle beyond the gunshots, indicating the attack may have been swift and unprovoked. Also present was Kenardo Bates, alive but with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. He was transported under critical condition to a nearby medical facility. A semi-automatic handgun was recovered near his body. The weapon was not registered in his name. Investigators could not trace its legal acquisition, suggesting it may have been obtained unlawfully. Initial ballistic analysis confirmed the bullets recovered matched the firearm found at the scene. Gunpowder residue tests were consistent with Bates firing the weapon. Shell casings indicated that at least 3 rounds were discharged. Timeline reconstruction determined that the shooting likely occurred sometime between 10:30 p.m. on August 23rd and 1 a.m. on August 24th. The water alarm was triggered several hours later, possibly by blood flow or property damage from the incident. The preliminary report from the medical examiner confirmed the fatal injuries were from close-range gunfire. Time of death was estimated at approximately midnight. Was there any physical evidence indicating a confrontation occurred before the shots were fired? Was the murder premeditated based on how the suspect entered, armed himself, and left no sign of struggle? Kenardo Bates was stabilized at the hospital and placed under armed guard. After several days of treatment, he regained consciousness and was deemed fit for custody. Law enforcement transferred him to the Alvin S. Glenn Detention Center. Formal charges were filed against Bates, including murder, kidnapping, and possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime. The inclusion of the kidnapping charge suggests investigators believe Jaylan was restrained, held against her will, or otherwise prevented from leaving prior to being shot. A bond hearing was scheduled, during which prosecutors argued that Bates posed a flight risk and a danger to the public. The judge denied bail, citing the severity of the crime and the evidence presented. During the press briefing, representatives from the Richland County Sheriff's Department stated that prior domestic violence behavior had not been reported to their agency. They emphasized that while no restraining order was on file, the case underscored the difficulty in responding to unreported threats. Officials also confirmed that the weapon was not legally purchased. Further investigation into the origin of the gun is ongoing. Prosecutors have not confirmed whether the murder was planned in advance or was a spontaneous act during an unplanned confrontation. Why was the kidnapping charge included? What specific evidence supported it? How did the suspect acquire the weapon? And was there a point at which law enforcement could have intercepted it? Following the discovery of Jaylan Hasty's body in her Columbia, South Carolina apartment, her family issued brief but clear public statements. In interviews and community forums, relatives expressed concern not only over the murder itself, but over how long the warning signs were visible before action was taken. Several family members stated that Jaylan had attempted to distance herself from her ex-partner, and that her discomfort with his behavior was not a secret within the household. On social media, her death prompted a wave of attention. Public posts demanded accountability and began to circulate documented signs of prolonged stalking. Hashtags referencing Jaylan's name appeared across Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. These posts were not only tributes, they functioned as calls to action. Individuals shared personal stories of similar experiences, transforming her case into a reference point for wider domestic violence awareness. Soon after, several advocacy efforts launched in Jaylan's name. The most notable included partnerships with Columbia-based women's safety organizations such as HEY Brave Girl and the SHE Foundation, both of which had pre-existing domestic violence awareness initiatives. Jaylan's relatives, in cooperation with these groups, organized memorial events as part of broader campaigns. These events were structured to highlight the systematic failures contributing to her death. Public vigils followed, including a widely attended candlelight memorial in Columbia. Activists, local politicians, and residents gathered to discuss both Jaylan's story and broader patterns of domestic violence-related fatalities in the state. A march organized 2 months later drew further attention to the absence of meaningful intervention before Jaylan's death. Did Jaylan's case increase visibility of similar threats in other households? What responsibility does a community bear when warning signs are visible but unaddressed? A critical review of the case timeline shows a pattern consistent with established domestic violence escalation models. Experts often cite that the period following a victim's separation from an abusive or controlling partner is statistically the most dangerous. In Jaylan's case, it was during the separation phase that her ex-partner began frequenting her apartment complex, sitting in his car for extended periods and watching her movements. These actions mirror classic stalking behaviors: repeated unwanted attention, intimidation, and covert surveillance. At this stage, it remains unclear whether any police reports were filed by Jaylan regarding Bates' presence or conduct. Law enforcement has not released full 911 logs or complaint history related to the residents. There are currently no publicly available records of restraining orders or filed petitions for protection. Legal experts reviewing the timeline note multiple intervention points that could have been acted upon. These include repeated loitering by a known ex-partner near the victim's residence, documented changes in Jaylan's routine, often used in courts to establish emotional or psychological distress. Testimonies from neighbors indicate several individuals had witnessed suspicious activity, yet no collective report or escalation occurred. Domestic violence analysts point out that Bates exhibited behaviors categorized in what's referred to as intimate terrorism, psychological control paired with monitoring and eventual physical violence. These patterns, while often apparent to those close to the victim, are rarely taken seriously without legal documentation or immediate threats. At what point do repeated, nonviolent stalking behaviors warrant preemptive legal action? How many visible indicators must exist before a preventive step is mandated by authorities? After the incident, Kenardo Bates was taken into custody while recovering from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He was formally charged with murder, kidnapping, and possession of a weapon during a violent crime. He was denied bond. No trial date has yet been confirmed in public records as of the latest updates. Legal counsel has not released statements on whether Bates will pursue a plea deal or proceed to trial. According to preliminary court documents, prosecutors are expected to introduce digital evidence showing Bates sustained monitoring of Jaylan's location, including geolocation data and message history. Whether a psychiatric evaluation will be introduced as part of a defense strategy remains speculative. Courtroom attendance has been mixed, with high initial media interest followed by a sharp decline. However, advocates connected to Jaylan's family have stated they will continue monitoring the legal process closely. Will the court address the full timeline of stalking or focus solely on the murder itself? Has the suspect provided any indication of motive, justification, or remorse? Jaylan Hasty's case reignited discussion about South Carolina's ongoing issues with domestic violence. The state has repeatedly ranked among the top 10 in the U.S. for women killed by men in domestic situations, according to national crime statistics. In the months following the incident, local legislators introduced proposals to re-examine stalking laws and expedite emergency restraining orders. These discussions were fueled by media attention on Jaylan's death and advocacy by groups like the SHE Foundation, which lobbied for Jaylan's law, a yet unenacted policy proposal seeking to mandate automatic welfare checks when multiple stalking reports are filed within a 90-day window. Community programs were also launched focusing on education around the separation phase danger period, particularly targeting school-aged youth and college campuses in the region. Have these new measures proven effective in preventing further cases? How does South Carolina compare to other states in proactive domestic violence interventions? The case of Jaylan Hasty exposes procedural and societal failures in recognizing and responding to escalating danger signs. At several points, signs of surveillance, intimidation, and control were present, yet no institutional action was taken in time to prevent the outcome. No available records suggest that protection orders were filed or enforced. There is no public evidence of coordinated community intervention, despite neighbors noticing repeated suspicious behavior. The legal system, while now engaged post-crisis, did not have mechanisms in place to act earlier. As the legal process continues, numerous unanswered questions remain. What protocols failed in this case? Would policy change have made a measurable difference? Was Jaylan's death a singular case or part of a broader failure pattern? How many warnings must someone give before they're taken seriously? If leaving isn't enough to protect someone, what is? In cases like Jaylan's, is justice ever truly served? Or is prevention the only real form of justice? If you found this story as gripping and heartbreaking as we did, don't forget to like this video and share it with others. And if you want to hear more true crime stories that uncover the mysteries behind these tragic events, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell. You won't want to miss our latest stories, updates, and discussions. Thank you for joining us on this journey to seek justice and explore the truth. Together, we can make a difference. Until next time, stay safe and stay aware.